Hey guys, Peter here to tell you about the latest from Bat, Under the Crooked Claw, out May 17th on Nuclear Blast. The album has 13 tracks, 35 minutes in length, and this is the band's second full-length studio album. They are American speed metal band. Now, the design of this record is straightforward, as is the sound, as is the album itself. 13 songs, 35 minutes, you cannot blink, otherwise you probably miss an entire song. You have to stay focused with this record, but that's not hard because the album is extremely engaging. Engaging in the sound, engaging in the vocals, engaging in the lyrics. And the way they put it together from a structural standpoint, creating enough ebbs and flows to allow the album to feel more dynamic, to take a little bit of the sting away from how driven the record is and this sense of direction that the album overall offers. So it's a record that still moves you forward at great speed with great intent and intensity, but those nuances, those slight changes from song to song really allow the album to have a little bit more life and to feel a lot richer. So this is the best experience possible when you try to pack 13 songs in 35 minutes into an overall album, creating a record that has almost a set list style vibe. You look at the way the album starts with an intro, you see the way the songs move. That's exactly the same dynamics that you want to see during a live performance. So this is taking what works in a live setting and now putting it into a studio format as far as the design is concerned, but also as far as the sound goes. Because when you listen to this album, I think the first thing that you're going to notice is not the guitars. I mean, you're going to notice the guitars, but the first thing you're going to notice is how predominant the bass sound is, how much it is in the forefront, sung in and sung out, how much grit it has, how groovy it sounds at times, coming across almost as a secondary guitar and allowing you to see the bass almost riffing in parallel with the guitars. I thought that was genius because it allows the album to have this robust nature to it. It allows the sound on the record to feel a lot bigger because with the guitars being so driven and the solos being very melodic, it flattens out the overall bandwidth of the record and of the sound. So infusing a bass that has more life, more energy, that works as a secondary guitar, definitely then broadens that sound and makes the songs feel more and sound more robust, which works really well when they have to transfer these tracks from the studio to a live setting. This allows for a much smoother transition because you're almost feeling that you're already listening to a live band when you listen to this record. It's a very raw sounding album. It's not overly produced, not that you need that when it comes to speed metal. So it's an album that has a lot of live characteristics in the studio. Obviously, there's a little bit more of guitar work that you can do in the studio with one guitar that you're not going to be able to do live, and that's where that bass sound comes in, and I think it's going to work tremendously transitioning from one set to the other. So I honestly enjoyed the bass, I enjoyed the grittiness, I enjoyed the grooviness, but more importantly, I enjoy the role that it played, like I said, as a secondary guitar. Now, obviously, the guitars are going to be the main focus. It's one of the pillars of this album, as it normally it should be with a speed metal record, because a lot of that speed, a lot of that tempo comes from that guitar sound. The only time you're going to find that the guitar sound is a little bit more clear, a little bit with less noise around it, are in the solos. The solos come across a little bit more crisp. They still have a lot of intensity. They're still very driven, very old school in terms of the way they come across, where they're placed within the tracks. There's a lot of old school elements in this record, and I think the solos is the one that really defines itself, but it's also where the guitars, like I said, come a little bit more clear. Outside of the solos, the guitars are a little bit more raw, a little bit more dirty, a little bit more fuzzy, but you need to have that distinction between the two elements because that's also going to give character to the record, that's also going to give texture to the sound, and it's going to help the album feel like it has a lot more movement, not just forward movement, but lateral movement. So it's a nice way of integrating a little bit of a different style of production into an album that feels very raw and very live. Now, that also is seen in the way the vocals come across, and one of the things I really liked about the vocals on this record is that it had this distance between them and the sound. They were not integrated, they were not blended, they really felt separated. Once again, going back to the live experience, something that's very common in live shows, where the vocals really feel sometimes either they're at the back of the sound or they're at the front of the sound, depending on who's mixing at the table. But on this record, the vocals have that live experience to them because they feel completely separated from the sound, allowing the sound to be in the background and do its thing while the vocals come over the top, and they have that grit, that impact that helps emphasize the overall movement of the record and of the sound of the record. I also liked some of the backing vocals that they used sporadically throughout this album, using them on the right songs at the right time to also infuse a little bit of a live experience, where you're perhaps going to have the other members of the band coming in with their vocals and eventually even the audience contributing. So it's an album that opens, in certain songs, it opens the door to that sort of experience, and using some backing vocals in the studio side of things definitely helps give you that experience, give you that live atmosphere. But all around, Ryan was phenomenal on the vocals. Great delivery, great grit. This album is super hooky and super catchy, and I think for a speed metal band, it's not just about how fast you can play and how driven the songs are. They have to be memorable. If they're not memorable, and if they're not hooky, and if they're not catchy, then every single song sounds the same or feels like it sounds the same, and then the whole album just feels like one really long song that has some peaks and valleys. This album really defines itself because every track is hooky, and both musically and vocally, not just in the choruses. The choruses are super hooky throughout the entire album, but there's some riffs on this record outside of the chorus that are incredibly memorable as well, because of what they offer, how much they differentiate the songs from one another. This album is just really well designed and really well executed, and I feel like for a speed metal record, this is exactly what an album within that genre should sound like. This is the right production, a little bit old school, but more raw and gritty, more live, if you will, giving more emphasis to the bass, separating the vocals, giving them power and strength, allowing them to also bring heaviness to the sound and to the way the overall record comes across. Incredibly crafted album from top to bottom, and one of the albums within this genre that really sets the bar as far as speed metal is concerned for 2024. Like I said, this album has what every speed metal record should have outside of the speed. Hookiness, great catchy hooks, both musically and vocally, to allow these songs to become memorable and allowing the album to have longevity. You want to be able to enjoy the record, but you also want to go back and listen to it time and time again without feeling bored by it, or without feeling like you've listened to these songs on repeat. They have to be fresh every single time, and having those hooks makes them fresh every single time. As far as favorite songs are concerned, I want to start off with Just Buried, a very punk rock and roll riff and sound, which is pretty much the essence of this album. This album is Motorhead on steroids. So you have that punk, you have that rock and roll feel, you have some thrashy riffs here and there, but overall it's really a punk rock and roll album on steroids. So this track is just that. The guitars really drive the experience. You have that bass coming in, impacting the sound from underneath, and you have a little bit of a dark undertone that surrounds this entire song. Sometimes that dark undertone comes from the guitar sound, sometimes it comes from the bass sound, but it's always there. It kind of lingers throughout the entire song. The vocals nail it, they hit it incredibly well. They allow the song to feel very impactful, and then using some backup vocals here and there throughout the track definitely adds some texture and definitely creates some ripples in the vocal performance, allowing the tracks to feel a little bit more separated from one another, so that the vocal performance is not linear across each and every single song, but one of the most hooky and catchy songs on this record. Then we have Electric Warning. This is a track that has alternative speeds, if you will. It feels a lot more fast, a lot more driven in the verses, and then slows down a little bit more methodic in the chorus. This allows the chorus to be overemphasized. It allows the chorus to have a different way of being memorable. It's not necessarily hooky or catchy, but the way it's delivered and the difference that it has between how the song sounds in the verses versus the chorus allows it to stand out, allows it to have a little bit of a unique characteristic within itself. The guitars sound great on this song. The bass, once again, really drives the track, creating some thickness underneath it. It's almost like you have these two parallel cars racing one another, and one is a little bit more slim while the other one has a little bit more junk in the trunk. That's almost how this track comes about, and the drums have an impact on this song, but an impact that allows the overall sound to feel very, how can I say it, very, not compact, but tight. It allows the sound to feel tight. So I like the way the drums kind of become the belt that tightens it all together and makes this song stay on its tracks and push it forward. Last but definitely not least, Final Strike. This is the final song on the record, and it's a great riffing song. I love the guitars, I love the riffs on this track. The drums and bass work really well together to create a solid underlining sound and experience, making a little bit more volume, giving it more volume, grounding it a little bit better, and then you have the vocals coming over the top of the drums, bass, and guitars, allowing this song to have three clear, defined layers. It's perhaps one of the songs on the record where you can see the definition between all three layers the best. The vocals, the guitars, and then the drums. Great way to put a song together and great way of finishing the album. This is it. Let me know your thoughts on the latest from Bat. Hit me up in the description of this video in the comment section. I'll be reading those and getting back to you. Take care, guys.